We've all seen the impact of COVID-19. We've all knew this was going to be a tough time, but that's no comfort if you're out of a job, if you're having difficulty making ends meet.
COVID-19 is creating, of course, a stark economic picture for this country. More than 1 million Canadians lost their job just last month. More than 5 million have applied for the CERB, and the impact obviously far from over. How sustainable is this new reality? It's Thursday, and I'm here with At Issue. Chantal Hébert is in Montreal, Andrew Coyne is in Toronto, and Althea Raj is in Ottawa, all working remotely from their homes. And this is the only way I know it's Thursday, I have to be honest with you. Okay, the Prime Minister talked today most bluntly about some of these timelines, talking about a new normal. How long can a new normal exist in terms of trying to sustain the economy and a strong economy? Andrew, maybe I'll start with you this week.
Well, if you mean this level of lockdown, is not sustainable for very long. What we saw today in terms of the unemployment numbers is just the tip of the iceberg. That was a part of March. The April numbers are going to be much worse. And every day this carries on, the joblessness is going to mount, the failing corporations are going to mount up, the debts to the public sector, to the provincial and particularly the federal government are going to mount, and just the human toll in terms of psychological consequences, people with mental health issues. It's not sustainable in the long run. The good news is, at least from the country's perspective, is that the rate of growth of the epidemic is slowing, and slowing quite markedly. That's a challenge for the government because they don't want people to look at that data and say, okay, now we can let down our guard, now we can ease off, now we can backslide.
Yeah, that's probably needed because a backslide, as you point out, Chantal, would probably be the worst thing for everybody.
Yes, except that at some point, if you want out of this, and no, I don't think the current situation is sustainable for 18 to 24 months, and I don't think that is what governments have in mind in any way, shape, or form. But if you want to start getting out of it, Quebec, for instance, has been talking about restarting the economy. That's really hard to do in a serious fashion unless you reopen schools or you make childcare available again. And once you say that, I was listening to Premier Legault talking about maintaining the 2-meter distance. Well, there's one place, as you know and I know, where 2 meters distance is not going to be maintained. That's a classroom. That's for sure.
Althea, what do you make of how they're dealing with this in terms of the length we might be looking at?
It was very interesting. Today, in speaking in French, the Prime Minister suggested that this could be the new normal for a year and a half. He didn't outline exactly what he meant by the new normal during that time frame, and I think that there will be a lot of filling in of the gaps in the days ahead in terms of kind of just leaving that comment hanging. I don't think that's sustainable. I mean, it's very interesting that now you're actually hearing different themes emerging from the provinces and the federal government. Like the provinces are distinct from each other in terms of like when we think we can get the economy rolling again. When you think that the business subsidy hasn't even been passed yet, and money certainly is not going out the door.
Well, that brings up the wage subsidy. So it seems as though Parliament is now going to come back on Saturday. They've agreed to come back and look at that legislation. And the government says that this is sort of the biggest package, they say, in history, economic package in history. How important is that to shoring up businesses for the future of the economy, Andrew?
Oh, it's vitally important. They've made that very clear. The business has. The idea being to try and keep people actually connected to their employers rather than drifting away from the firm and having to, find them and find new people all over again once the economy starts going again. So a lot of people have been of the view that even taking into account the potential for waste and fraud in that particular program, it's worth doing. But we don't need to jettison parliamentary or democratic procedures either. And some ingenuity and some willingness to establish new precedents. I think we should be able to find a way that we can still have parliamentary scrutiny of the government and ability for people to criticize the ministers of the day. I mean, it's not only the procedures that we have to keep intact, we have to also keep intact the idea that it's legitimate to criticize people in authority, even in the middle of a crisis. And you get some people saying, oh, rally around the flag, any kind of criticism is off base. That's not true.
Yes, go ahead, Chantal, yeah.
Although I believe that the more vigorous discussion about the way forward, because there will have to be a vigorous discussion about the way forward, is not being preempted by having Parliament sit for a day at this point. The other issue about ingenuity is I believe that, yes, Parliament should have some form of life, but I don't believe that it should be restricted to people who can drive to Parliament Hill.
I will say the government is again sending a plane to pick up a few Conservatives, including Andrew Scheer. But obviously, it's not going to, fly across the country to get a good representation. And it's a little strange that this idea of a virtual parliament or some version of that doesn't seem to be the most welcome idea, Althea.
I mean, it's a little bit odd. I think, I have a point of view on this. It's a bit contrarian to what I would normally argue, but I don't think the opposition is being stifled. I mean, we have the Prime Minister having a 45-minute press conference every day. The Cabinet Minister is having another press conference for about an hour. We have the leader of the official opposition. Whenever he speaks, it is covered by the media. It is on national television. I listened to two House of Commons committee meetings for hours today. I'm not saying that there is not a time for a question period, but whether that should really be a negotiation tactic for getting money out the door, when perhaps what the opposition parties should be focused more on is the content of the legislation.
Last point.
We should be having a discussion about policy rather than having a discussion about politics. I don't think anybody outside of Ottawa really cares about politics at this point.
Last point to Andrew.
Well, I would say part of democratic accountability is politics, is the theater of Parliament. Now, maybe we can't have them physically present. Maybe it has to be done virtually. But that's what concentrates public attention. That's why Parliament was invented. We don't just have news conferences and dueling news conferences. We actually have them meeting each other, whether virtually or physically, in a way that the public can pay attention to and be drawn into.
One more point to Chantal, because I can see she wants to say something.
Well, I'm not convinced that message that Andrew is communicating is the way the public perceives it. To many Canadians, this is more about games than it is about what it really needs to be done. So whether it would draw the public's attention to that debate at this particular juncture, in that way, with the government sharing its bills with the opposition and actually putting in opposition ideas in the bill, I'm not convinced that the theater at this point would be well attended. As bored as we may be.
All right, got to leave it there. Thank you all for dialing in from your homes. Before we go, of course, be sure to subscribe to At Issue, the podcast. We do this, and there's always some extra content there, too. This week, we'll talk a little bit about those national projections and how important those numbers are to Canadians. Look for it on any major podcast app and our website, cbcnews.ca/thenational. For now, though, back to Andrew in Toronto.